to the Bayridge courts. We have 44 people who are registered to attend and offer feedback tonight. There's about 27 people that have logged into Zoom. We are going to start the live stream to YouTube, but then also just allow another about 90 seconds for everybody else to sort of filter into the virtual room so that we can begin our session on time. So we will be back in about 60 seconds. Thank you everyone for joining us. Hi everyone, thank you again for joining us. My name is Jen Panarski and I'm a communications officer with the City of Kingston. You are at our online engagement session to talk about improvements to the Bayridge courts. We have 44 people who are registered to offer feedback and see the plans tonight. We have 32 people that are now officially logged into Zoom and ready to participate. We are streaming now on YouTube and we are going to get started. So again, thank you for spending your evening with us, no matter where you are, to learn about the improvements to the Bayridge courts. This is an information session. The session is live streamed and recorded, and to protect your privacy, your microphones and the chat features are turned off. You'll see that if you do press the chat function, however, that's so that you can reach one of the panelists, and that's only if you have any technical problems with Zoom tonight. And we'll get to technical problems in just a second. So technology problems sometimes do happen. There's a couple of ways that you can resolve any issues you might have logging in or staying logged into the session. You can use the different view options in Zoom so that the presentation, you can see that, and then the speakers are a little bit smaller so you can focus on the content. On Get Involved Kingston, there are resources for how to participate in Zoom and some of the more common things that you might run into. If you get disconnected, you can call into the meeting by phone. So I'm just going to ask everyone to write down this number and webinar ID quickly. If you get disconnected, please call 1-647-374-4685. And then the webinar ID for this is 939-7195-9725. And it is also, like I said, being live streamed and closed captioned on YouTube. There is a Q&A session as part of our online engagement this evening. There's a couple of ways you can ask questions. You can ask a question by typing in the Q&A area in Zoom. Keep in mind that your name and your question will be visible to participants. You can ask a question verbally during the Q&A period. How you can do this is by pressing the raise hand function in Zoom, and we will turn on your microphone and then turn it off when you're done asking your question. And all of the questions and the responses will be shared in the reporting back on the project. It's going to take a few seconds here to allow everyone some time to review the guidelines for participation. If you've joined us at online engagement sessions before, these may be familiar to you. If this is your first time joining us, welcome. If there are any objections to the guidelines for participation, I'm going to ask you to use the raise hand function just so that I'm aware. I'm going to give everyone another few seconds or so to review the guidelines. Okay, seeing no objections to the guidelines for participation, we're going to jump right in to the information presentation by the project team behind this. So I'm going to turn everything over to Patricia Sharp. Oh, Patricia, you're muted.
Yes, sorry, I meant to do that. Thanks, everyone, and good evening. I'd like to thank you for taking the time to join us and for making the effort to use this new consultation format. Tonight, we're presenting the proposed plans for the courts at Bayridge Park. My name is Patricia Sharp. I'm the project manager for the project, and I'm with Parks and Shoreline in the Engineering Services Department at the city. Joining me tonight are also Neil Unsworth, who is the manager of Parks and Shoreline Engineering Services. We also have Jacqueline Grimmen, who's the manager of recreation programs with the Recreation and Leisure Department, and Daniel Dibbets, who's from Wentworth Landscape. They are the design consultants we've hired for the Bayridge Courts Improvements Project. Danielle will be presenting the proposed plan to you, but first I'll give you a bit of background on the project. If you could do the next slide, Jen. Thank you. The project has been initiated in response to the aging condition of the existing tennis courts at Bayridge Park. These courts were built over 30 years ago, and because of the unevenness of the surface and the extensive cracking, only 3 to 4 of the 6 courts have been available for actual use in recent years. There have been a few repair efforts over the last 10 years just to try and stretch out the lifespan of the courts, but it's very clear that they're in need of a substantial overhaul. We have set a $300,000 budget in 2021 for the renovation, and we expect to gain some efficiencies by locating the works within the footprint of the existing courts. So the proposed courts are following the 2 key recommendations from the Parks and Recreation Master Plan. The first one is that we need to spread out the tennis facilities more evenly across the city. The concentration of courts in Bayridge will, as a result, be reduced, and the future courts will be developed in other areas of the city, so the access is more equitably distributed to all of our residents. This approach takes into consideration the trends in the sport, as well as the growth of the population. The second goal of the project is to add new pickleball courts, which will recognize the trend in this trend in recreation. So now I'm going to hand it over to Danielle, who will take us through the proposed plan. And once she's done, I'll come back to address some of the questions that were submitted in advance of the meeting. And then after that, there'll be an opportunity for you to raise new questions. Danielle, next slide.
Thank you, Patricia, for providing the context and introduction to the project. The Bayridge Park Court Improvements Conceptual Plan, as shown here, takes into consideration the background information Patricia outlined, the existing infrastructure on site, and the project goals set forth by the City of Kingston. Through the reconfiguration of the courts, the proposed design now shows 3 regulation-size tennis courts that are now oriented north to south. The existing tennis courts were not 2 regulation size. To the east of the tennis courts, 4 regulation size pickleball courts are being proposed. To utilize existing infrastructure, the courts are proposed within the same footprint. As a result, the existing granular base material will be used with new asphalt paving covered with an acrylic court surface material, such as plexi-pave. An acrylic court surface is durable, has an anti-glare finish, helps with grip and traction while playing, and is made to react to the bounce and spin of the balls in a consistent and true way. The courts will be colored in 2 tones of green with white lines, and all courts will have fixed nets installed. The fence along the west and south sides of the courts, the left and bottom of your screen, will remain as existing 10-foot high chain link fence. The north side of the tennis court, top of the screen, will be a new 10-foot high chain link fence installed a little further north than the existing fence to meet tennis court size regulations. Around the boundaries of the pickleball courts and between the tennis and pickleball courts, there is a proposed 6-foot high chain link fence. 2 single gates, one entering the tennis courts and the other entering the pickleball courts, are proposed to minimize user traffic through the court space. The area of the existing court not being reused to the north will be restored to open lawn space. A new concrete walkway is proposed along the north side with a concrete pad and 2 benches as a seating area. The proposed parking lot improvements includes additional parking spaces, accessible parking stalls, and new granular surfacing. The expanded parking lot will support the increase of expected users with the addition of the pickleball courts. Thank you for listening to the overview of the Bayridge Park Court Improvements Conceptual Plan. And I will now hand it back over to Patricia for a few answers to some questions we've received already.
Okay, thank you, Danielle.
Patricia, it's Jen. I have just been notified that there's a bit of a delay in the closed captioning for YouTube. So if you're following along by YouTube, please stand by. We're aware that there is a delay in the closed captioning. Thanks, Patricia. It's over to you now.
Okay, thanks, Jen. Yes, so several people submitted questions prior to this evening's meeting. So I was just going to take a few minutes to address those questions. And I after hearing what Danielle had to say, I realized that some of the information may be duplicated. So I'll try and be brief with that duplication of information. I've framed the questions here as talking points in an effort to communicate the information as efficiently as possible. I also want to mention that some of the comments that we received speak to issues that are more within the realm of the Parks and Recreation Master Plan. And the focus of tonight's meeting is to present the specific plans for the Bayridge courts. So for the broader planning issue of the tennis and pickleball court distribution within the city, you can consult the Parks and Recreation Master Plan, which can be found online, as well as the contact info for the appropriate city staff. But we do have Jacqueline Grimman with us here tonight, and she can hear feedback from this perspective for the tennis and pickleball court distribution. So the questions that we had about the specifics for Bayridge courts were related to first, the playing surface, which Danielle has addressed, that the existing asphalt is to be scraped off. The granular layer below will be repaired, and that it will be coated with a specialized acrylic sports paint, such as PlexiPave in 2 shades of green, as well as the lines. And some of the existing fencing will remain, and some new fencing will be added. The construction is planned to begin this summer, and we expect it to be complete by the fall. And both the courts, tennis and the pickleball, will be of regulation size. And we've had a question about why we need regulation size. This is, in addition to optimized play experience, we also do it for safety reasons. We develop the courts to regulation size where possible. For the next slide, please. The courts are oriented north-south, which was obvious in the plan, and this is to achieve best playability during the morning and the evening sessions. The tennis courts will get new posts and nets, and pickleball courts will have fixed posts and nets. And the surface drainage, it will be appropriately drained according to the best practices for court construction to ensure enough runoff. Next slide. Some of the other questions that were brought forth were about windscreens. Windscreens are not being proposed at this time. We were also asked about lighting, which is also not being proposed at this time. However, court lighting is being considered in the Parks and Rec master plan, and some locations in the city could be considered for getting lighting as well. The hours are not currently regulated. And question about basketball nets, we're not proposing basketball at this time. If we were to add a basketball net, it would likely be on one of the tennis courts, and then it would share the space. But we expect to have a high level of tennis usage with the 3 proposed courts, and basketball could create some challenges here. For washrooms, there are currently washrooms on site. Some of the other sports user groups have access to them. However, they do not have operating hours, and they're not currently open to members of the public who just drop by the park. So access to the existing washrooms and changes to how they currently operate, or even having a porta potty installed, would all have to be considered by the Public Works Department. And we had a question about whether there would be a seasonal bubble or structure. And at this time, a court bubble is not being proposed. Now we can open it up to other questions, either by the Q&A or verbally.
Hi, everyone. So I will moderate the Q&A this evening. We will switch back and forth between questions that are added typewritten into the Q&A, and then for people who would like to ask a question verbally. Be patient. We have a lot of people with us tonight, and we will get to as many people as we can. So I am going to start with a question. I see, David, you have your hand up and you would like to ask a question verbally. So I'm going to unmute yourself and take it away, David.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Thank you very much for doing this tonight. I had 2 questions, actually. One was, and it's related to the pickleball. You mentioned the company that's contracted to do the work is Wentworth, I believe. And my question regarding them, have they already built pickleball courts previously? And if they have, where have they built them? Because my experience, I've been involved in pickleball for, I don't know, 6 years in the city of Kingston with some other people. And we've had some lines put on different parks at Riverview, etc., where we like use dual use courts, like it's tennis and it's also pickleball. And each time we had communicated to the people that were making the decision with the city that we would like to have somebody present to kind of do the lines and make sure that there'd be enough space behind the courts, on the side of the courts, etc. And they said they'd agree to it, but then unfortunately the courts, they went ahead and just painted the lines, and then it's just not the greatest to play. So I'm wondering if Wentworth has already done courts, and then if they have, great, and we could kind of look at what they've done in the past and just make sure our lines and everything, that there's enough room behind the courts, etc. And I had one other question. Is it okay to present that one as well?
David, can I just get you to hang on to that one? Since we have so many people, I just want to make sure everybody gets an opportunity to ask a question to speak. You can hang on to it and then raise your hand again, or you can add it into the Q&A. Is it okay if we have someone from the project team answer your first question about the line painting? And that question was for Danielle, correct?
Sure. Thank you.
Hi, David. Thanks for your question. I'm with Wentworth Landscapes, and we have designed other pickleball courts in Gananoque, and we are designing it as per the USAPA and IFP court layout, and that's how it will be installed, the way we've designed it.
Okay, thank you, David. Thank you, Danielle. Like I said, David, be sure to raise your hand again or type it into the Q&A, and we're just going to move on to the typewritten questions. Okay, the first question is from Allison, and she asks, why not add lights so that people can play after dark? Oh, Patricia, you're muted.
I've realized that I just unmuted myself. Yes, so as I mentioned that we are not currently adding lights at this time. However, we will be reviewing the light issue in terms of the Parks and Recreation Master Plan. Some lighting will be added to some courts across the city. So the master plan is in draft mode right now, and I believe it's coming out at the end of April. And you could also pose that question to the people who are working on the Parks and Rec Master Plan, and Jacqueline is perhaps one of those people.
Yeah, Jen, if I could just add further to Patricia's comment, appreciate Patricia. Yes, the draft of the update to the Parks and Recreation Master Plan is in the final stages. It is currently available online through the city's website, through the Get Involved platform. You can review the full draft updated document. It is going forward to the Arts, Recreation and Community Policies Committee at the end of April. So if there is any additional feedback that you'd like me to take back to the consultant, I'm happy to do that. Thank you.
Okay, we're moving on to a written question from Ryan, and he asks, the part of the existing footprint that is flagged for being converted to lawn is large enough for 2 pickleball courts. Is there a reason that isn't being taken advantage of? Oh, Patricia and Neil, would you like to take this one, please?
I can answer the question. Hi, Ryan. It's been a long time. We're taking our direction to develop 4 pickleball courts from the Parks and Rec Master Plan. The direction is not to develop 6, it's to develop 4. So we have to take the direction from the Parks and Rec Master Plan. But I appreciate the interest in having more than 4. But at this time, the concept plan is only showing 4. I think that's my answer to that question.
Thank you, Neil. We're moving along to a question from Scott, and he asks, anchors for center straps are necessary to make courts regulation. Are these included? A tennis net should be 3 feet in the middle and 3 feet 6 inches on the sides.
I can answer that question. Yes, we would typically spec anchors and center straps for tennis nets. We will also be reviewing that with our operations department as they are the ones who have to maintain the ground anchors. Center straps will probably be on the nets when we purchase them.
Thank you. So I see the next written question is from Heather. Heather, you have a fairly long comment, and it looks like it's a lot about design modifications. So if I can, and if you can use the raise hand function to let me know if I can paraphrase this a little bit, and then you're welcome to come in and clarify if I've misinterpreted what you've said. So Heather is wondering, I would like to know if you're open to design modifications. And if so, she'd like to suggest the following. Move or extend the proposed concrete pad with benches to a more central location relative to the single gates, and so that it's accessible to both courts, and relocate the single gate access for the pickleball court so that it's located beside the tennis courts. And she says that this would make seating more equitable for both the tennis and the pickleball players. And then based on her experience, it's difficult to hold your place in line for the next available court if you're far away on a bench. So from the project team, can somebody address Heather's comments or questions?
I think those are very good suggestions that we can take back to the design team and certainly consider. I don't think we can commit to those now, but I think they're good ideas, and I would like to consider them.
Okay, thank you, Heather. And just to let everyone know that all of the questions asked tonight, both over the phone, verbally, or using the Q&A, those will be captured in the reporting back. So I'll move on to the next question, and it is from Dan. Oh, sorry. Yes, it's from Dan. And he asks, based on the usage in recent years, why are we reducing the number of tennis courts? There are already lineups to use the tennis courts. So Neil or Patricia, Jacqueline, is
Yeah.
anybody able to answer
I'll
Dan's
start.
question?
Yeah, sorry. I'll start off. This is a Parks and Rec Master Plan recommendation to reduce the cluster size of tennis courts in the West End. In Henderson Park, we have 6 tennis courts, and in Bayridge, we had, when they were in good shape, we had 6 tennis courts as well. And our long range plan for the city over the next 10 plus years is to spread those courts more evenly around the city so that other neighborhoods that don't have any tennis courts, they'll get more. And there'll be a little bit more equity amongst different parts of the community. So it is a different model than having large destinations in the West. The other issue that we're dealing with is that because the courts were undersized and the property line to the school board is immediately to the west of the current courts, when we go and put regulation courts in, we also end up losing a bit of real estate because the new courts are wider essentially than the existing ones, which were very undersized actually. I think that answers the question, but Jacqueline's taking this feedback in. We know there's going to be a lot of interest in both pickleball and tennis court strategy in our long range planning. And that Parks and Rec Master Plan is going in April to the committee, Arts and Rec Committee. And we are not going to have this park under construction before then. So we'll be taking our cues from that. But I will say there is actually a physical limitation on the space on the site, just unless we were to essentially cross the line over into the schoolyard. I think that would be really our only other option. But thanks for the feedback.
Okay, I'm going to move along to a question from Bob. Now, Bob, I saw that you also had your hand raised. So if you'd prefer to ask this question verbally, you can use the raise hand function again. I'm going to read it out though. Bob asks, has the city received any feedback on the grant they have requested for this project? So if the project team needs more information about this grant, just let me know and we'll have Bob ask, sort of supplement that in the Q&A or ask verbally.
No, I can answer the question, Jen. We have not heard back. So we've applied for a federal grant to fund this project. If we don't get the grant, we're still going to build it. So that's the good news. But we have applied for a federal grant to support our funding. I hope to hear back by the end of the month. That's the sort of the fiscal end of year. But whether we get the grant or we don't get the grant is not going to affect whether this project goes ahead. So hopefully that's a positive answer, but the grant is related to providing increased support for outdoor activities related to changes in our patterns due to COVID. It's a COVID grant. Thanks.
Thanks, Bob. Just to remind everyone that you can ask a question using the Q&A function, or you can ask it verbally by using the raised hand function. I see that there is also somebody who has called in by phone, and you're welcome to ask a question as well. Going to move on to a question from Gary, and he asks, will the tennis courts also be lined as well for pickleball courts, similar to the Henderson courts, as numerous individuals have their own nets, and this will allow for additional capacity for pickleball, which is growing in popularity?
I can answer that question. The tennis courts won't be lined permanently with pickleball lines. I believe the only time that there may be temporary pickleball lines installed is if the pickleball community wants to hold an event, like a weekend competition event at the courts. Otherwise, the tennis courts will be for tennis and not pickleball as well. I hope that answers the question.
Jen, can you toggle back to the to Danielle's drawing thing? Jen, are you muted by any chance?
I am muted. I've done a ton of these engagement sessions, and it doesn't get any easier, everyone. We all end up muting ourselves sometimes. Okay, so this question is from Mark, and he says, I know this is about Bayridge courts. Between Henderson and Bayridge, there will be more pickleball courts than tennis. The master plan didn't indicate other tennis courts being developed, as far as I saw. Can you give an idea as to where other tennis courts will be developed? Yeah, go ahead, Jacqueline.
Thanks, Jen. Thanks, Mark, for your question. Certainly appreciate that. The plan does identify a few different sites, including Cataraqui West Park, William Hackett Park, and Shannon Park. But because it is not a full-scale implementation plan, it does provide flexibility to allow staff to conduct research and engage with the community further on where those courts are located. So certainly there are more opportunities to come, and we will bring those opportunities forward for public engagement when the time comes.
Hey, thanks, Jacqueline. Gary, I see that you have your hand up and you would like to ask a question verbally, so I am just going to unmute you. Go ahead, Gary.
I think he's still muted.
Gary, you can unmute yourself now if you're able to. Thank you.
Sorry, I'll cut to the question. Somebody else mentioned about the big demand for tennis courts, and I'm wondering about booking of tennis courts. I'm with the Kingston Tennis Club, and one of the big attractions there is being able to book a court so you know exactly when you're going to be able to play. I'm puzzled why the city isn't doing that kind of thing, especially when I ask people about tennis and they say, difficulty is you can't be sure getting a court. So has booking being looked at?
I'm happy to take that question, Jen. Gary, thanks for that question. At this time, the booking of the courts is not something that that we're looking at implementing. It's certainly something that I can receive that feedback and take that back to our team. We do continuously review those types of requests and best practices with other municipalities and certainly with Parks and Recreation associations, both provincially and nationally, just to keep our ear to the ground on what might be possible. But at this time, it's not something that we're exploring. But certainly have noted that feedback and appreciate it.
Okay, thanks, Gary. We have a question from Councillor Chappelle, and it was received through the chat function. And he asks, why not run the electrical wiring now while under development for future lighting of the courts?
I think I can answer that one, Jen. The way, it's a great idea, actually, especially if we had lots of pathways or roads that we were building, as like in a large community park. This particular park, I don't know if you can see it in the diagram, but the lighting for tennis would go basically a bank of lights along the northern edge and a bank of lights along the southern edge, and they would sort of aim inwards. I will say that before we would take an initiative to actually propose lighting or actually have have the infrastructure in place for future lighting. We would want to communicate with through consultation on that particular subject matter. So, it's very close to neighboring homes. Lighting is not a sure thing on this site as far as consultation goes. There may be better candidate sites for lighting over time. So I think if we were to consider putting in preliminary infrastructure for lighting, we would want to make sure that that was something that was part of the mandate of the project, and it's not at this time. The good news is that if this site is identified for lighting in the future, running the conduits and the wiring at that time will be no more expensive than it would have been at this time, because we wouldn't have to go like under the courts or something like that. So there's clear land on both north and southern edges. But it is it's a good idea to pre-think those things. Thank you for the comment, Councillor.
Okay, so David, I see your additional question. He asks, windscreens are almost a necessity for pickleball, as the ball is much lighter than a tennis ball. Can we install wind prevention materials? For example, like we already do in Loyalist, 4 by 6 foot banners are attached to fencing in addition to their windscreens. And he asks, would this be permitted?
Are you asking that the user bring their own windscreen materials? Is that the question?
Okay. Hi, David. I see your hand raised, and so I'm going to unmute you. Take it away, David.
You can hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, like basically, I installed it in May, like at Loyalist Township in Bath, with the club's permission. And then at the end of the year, we just clipped them down, like at the end of the season in October. So like it would be up there from April till maybe October.
Okay. I think that would be that's an interesting idea that I can take back to the team, and then we can consider that, and we'll get back to you.
Thank you.
Thanks, David. I see an additional comment from Heather, and Heather, just let us know if this is just a comment you would like recorded or if you have a follow-up question, but she just says there are already 9 courts in the downtown area and 6 in the east side. I'm going to move along to a question from Gord, and he has just a comment. I was surprised when I moved to Kingston that there are no outdoor public courts in Kingston that have night lights. I can just say from my experience that it is amazing to have night lights to not only extend play, but also very refreshing to play at night during those hot summer days. I think lights should seriously be considered in the initial construction of the Bayridge courts.
Yeah, we've heard that as well, Jen, over the years. In fact, actually, a number of tennis courts in Kingston back in the 80s and the 90s had lights, but the infrastructure failed over time and it wasn't revitalized. But certainly the Parks and Rec Master Plan recognizes the need for lights. The cost is not something that we have a budget for. I couldn't estimate the cost for lighting the tennis courts, but I would suspect it's in the hundreds of thousands of dollars for each site. And then in addition, the same comment I provided to the counselor related to that consultation on installing lights is actually a whole second kind of conversation due to light spillage and light pollution and concerns with neighbors. But absolutely, we understand that, especially when the time changes in the fall, after work, it's very hard to get more than a game or 2 on before it's pitch black. So thank you for the feedback, and it is important, but we need the Recreation Master Plan to go through its process so that we can set budgets to support those extra amenities.
Thanks, Neil. We have a question from Councillor Chappelle that was submitted through the Q&A tool, and he says, the green patch of recovered lawn to the north of the new tennis courts was discounted for additional pickleball courts. What about basketball nets or half courts?
Yeah, I'll answer that one as well. Definitely being close to the schoolyard and in a suburban community, basketball is a strong need. The project currently does not include basketball as part of its, again, program or budget. If that was added to the project, knowing that we're probably going to have some conflict with multi-use basketball on the tennis, as Patricia had explained earlier, I agree that we would likely recommend basketball outside of the tennis courts. Likely north of the tennis courts would be a challenge with the noise generated from basketball in the adjacency of the townhouses and people's private amenity space. We would probably look to some sort of a partnership with the school board to the left or the west of the tennis court, because or alternately even along Bayridge Drive. So a couple of other places on the site that could support tennis, but again, sort of thing we would want to consult with the community on as a recommended upgrade, but not currently in the program. But a good idea.
Okay. Okay, I just wanted to let everyone who's following along on YouTube know that we have restored our closed captioning, so thank you for your patience. I'm going to move along to a question that is coming in from Delwyn, and they would like to ask this verbally. So Delwyn, I'm going to unmute you and it's your turn.
Okay. I'm very disappointed that the city is taking the position of reducing clustering of tennis courts. This creates a major problem with the Kingston Tennis Group, who stands at 60 players now, and in 4 years, and certainly is going to be growing as there's more retirees. As well, it reduces the chance of tennis tournaments in the public domain. And pickleball certainly seems to have more opportunity to do so. But our group and pickleball in general are very social oriented, and we rely heavily on numbers of people. And knowing that Henderson will be reduced to 4 courts, it's really going to put a bind. How are we going to utilize courts in the fashion that we do?
Hi, Jen. I'm happy to jump in on that one. Delwyn, thanks for that feedback. Certainly the update to the Parks and Recreation Master Plan, that information that has been prepared as part of that draft update, comes from a number of different sources, some of that being public engagement feedback, and we've taken feedback over the last approximately 18 months to 2 years in a variety of formats, as well as looking at studies from different municipalities, as well with tennis and pickleball organizations and associations. The recommendations in the Parks and Recreation Master Plan do look at, like Neil had said previously, a more equitable distribution across the city. And that's seen in a number of different areas within the plan, but you can certainly take your feedback back to the consultant and provide that as we move forward with that report to the Arts, Recreation and Community Policies Committee in April.
Okay, thank you. So I'm just looking at the time. It's 6:44 and we have about 8 more questions to get through. So if you would like to ask a question before we wrap at 7 o'clock, you can do that by using the raise hand function and we will unmute you, or you can enter it in the Q&A. I do see some repeat names on our Q&A list. So with your permission, I'm going to ask questions, or going to read questions from people who haven't submitted to the Q&A before this evening. So going on to Paula, Are the length of both the tennis and pickleball courts confirmed to be long enough beyond the lines back to the fence? Unfortunately, the Victoria Park tennis court has not enough space between the baseline and the fence.
I can answer that one. Victoria Park was one of those very rare tennis courts that we had to build undersized. The original tennis court was undersized, like vastly undersized because it was built on an old road bed. Hi, Paula, nice to see you again. Sorry, it's been a long time. But when we moved the tennis court to another part of Victoria Park, we had to choose between saving about 6 or 7 mature silver maple trees or making the tennis court a little bit shorter. I am interested to talk offline a little bit about constraints to playability, because that seems we did consider those factors as part of Victoria Park, and the dimensions are only off by a matter of feet, not tens or 20 of feet. Anyways, these particular courts are all regulation size in Bayridge, both pickleball, and I see there's a subsequent question on pickleball, but the pickleball and tennis are all regulation size with the correct distance from the baselines to the back fencing and between courts. Thanks.
Okay, I'm going to go to another typewritten Q&A, and I believe this is from Taco, and they ask, many people who play tennis or pickleball have very busy schedules and would like to be certain of being able to play at a particular time. When are you considering putting in online booking? Go ahead, Jacqueline.
Thanks, Jen. Thanks for this question. I know I did address this earlier on in the session tonight. At this time, there isn't an implementation plan, and we aren't looking at implementing an online booking system for the courts. That's something that hadn't been considered and isn't part of the work plan. Certainly, do appreciate that feedback. I know we do book other indoor amenities and some of our outdoor amenities in the city. And this is something that I can take back to our team as well for consideration. But I do just want to be clear that this isn't something that's planned to be implemented at this time.
Hey, thank you, Jacqueline. We have a question from Councillor Osanek, and she asks, how many pickleball courts are needed to host a national tournament like Kingston hosted indoors at the Invisa Centre in 2019? I think if Kingston is serious about sports tourism, which we are, then we need 8 pickleball courts, and we should support Ryan's idea to move the pickleball courts to the west to put 4, sorry, Councillor Osanek, I'm just 4 + 2 + 6 courts at Bayridge. Then they can take the tennis courts for an additional 12 pickleball courts. Can national tournaments be played on 16 courts only? I think 18 courts is necessary.
I'm going to field the question because I spoke to the councillor about this last week. I think we need to take the question away and understand a little bit more about what's being asked. But thank you, Councillor Osanek. I think just reading through the through the question, I think the question actually is meant to read, can we add 2 more pickleball courts to the proposed 4, which would equal 6, not 4 + 2 + 6. I believe the intent was that it was the 4 that's proposed, and then if we added 2 more, as Ryan has suggested, that would get us to 6 dedicated pickleball courts, and then the remaining 3 tennis courts could have tape put on them and create 12 temporary event, courts that a tournament could occur on, and then you would essentially have 18 courts in play for that weekend until the tape was peeled off. So I'll answer the question in one way, is that We don't have a mandate to grow the project to 6 pickleball courts at this time. The concept shows 4. I will say that we have a design for the long range planning to support tournament play in Bell Park. Unfortunately, that project had to be delayed due to the pandemic and resource allocation concerns last year. So it's not going to be implemented until construction would start in 2024, which is at least a year later than we had hoped. Again, a council decision to delay as a result of the pandemic impact. And they'll have dedicated courts. They'll have 8 dedicated courts, so there'll be much less need to create temporary lines for outdoor tournaments, because there'll be a much larger complement of pickleball that's dedicated for that purpose in that location. But and in the fullness of time, that's where we would see tournaments happening. And we worked sort of very long and hard with Ryan and the pickleball community to make sure that was well represented in Bell Park. But I think we'll have to take the question away about whether there's any potential to grow this project to 6 pickleball courts for the variety of reasons we've heard so far. And I think that would have to be reflected in the Parks and Rec master plan, because again, we're taking our lead kind of from that. But I understand the question clearly, and I just wanted to clarify to the audience that I believe that's what the question was meant to say. But thank you so much.
My apologies, Councillor Ostanek, if I read that wrong. Feel free to reach out to Neil and the project team to clarify your question. I'm going to move along to Nigel, who would like to ask a question verbally. Nigel, I'm going to unmute you. Take it away, Nigel.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Ken, thank you.
Thank you. My question concerns seating and the concrete pad with 2 benches on it, which sounds pretty brutal if you're sitting there in the middle of the summer on a concrete pad. Not very good. A lot of seniors play pickleball and tennis, and sometimes there are obviously overlaps, people waiting to play both sports. 2 benches doesn't seem like a lot. Is there any way of looking at this and improving the seating characteristics of this space? So perhaps there are more benches, perhaps on grass or with shade. I don't see any shade there. It's just something I'm looking at for people's health and well-being. And also, is there any way of putting any perhaps vines along the south fence to provide some shade if there's any room for seating inside the tennis courts? Thank you very much.
I can do that. I can answer the question. I think that those are good design ideas that we can take back with us and consider when we're reviewing the design, particularly for additional benches and perhaps relocating them, and perhaps adding trees for shade on either side, north and south, for the shade. The question about the vines, I think you said vines. I wasn't sure if I heard you correctly. I have a concern about vines on fencing, and the fact that with all the asphalt that they wouldn't actually thrive, and then they don't actually really provide a whole lot of shade. So my preference would be trees instead of vines. Thank you.
Okay, so I see that the time is 6:54, and there are still a number of questions that we haven't gotten time to answer yet. So these will all be captured in our reporting out, but I'm going to try and get through as many as I can. So there's a question from Ben, and he asks, since there are no measurements shown on the drawings, I'd like to know how much room there is between the end of the court and the fence. Just making sure that when you serve the ball that we don't hit the fence with our paddle.
I can answer that one. Thanks, Ben, for your question. So for the tennis courts, from the baseline to the fence is 21 feet. And for the pickleball, from the baseline to the fence is 8 feet.
Okay, thank you. So Scott has a question and he's wondering why windscreens are not included in this project. Is this a budget issue?
Thanks for the question, Scott. We haven't typically provided windscreens on our tennis court, and we can certainly take it back. And I was interested in the idea that was presented earlier about the user group providing a windscreen for the season. I know that one of the issues that we have is that they have a short lifespan and that we have to repeatedly replace them. So it is an issue that we have to take up with our operations department. And I will take it back to them, your question. Thank you.
Okay, so that addresses all the questions. Everybody who has asked a question either verbally or has typed it in, at least one of your questions have been gotten to. We did receive a question from Heather in the chat, and she's hoping to connect with Delwyn. Delwyn, with your permission, could we ask you to type your email address into the chat so that it will only go to the panelists, it won't go to anyone else, so that we can share that with Heather. Heather, if we can also ask your permission to share your email address in that same chat, please not in the Q&A, because we want to keep your information private. So I'm just double checking to make sure that everyone has had all of their questions addressed. So I do want to say thank you everyone for joining us this evening. Before I let you go, we just want to acknowledge that the online engagement sessions are new for the city and we're learning as we go along. So I'm going to launch an exit poll just that asks for your feedback on how the technology went for this evening. Happy to say that we had 44 people registered tonight and we had 44 people in attendance. So thank you very much. I'm going to leave the poll open for a few minutes, but we will end the YouTube live stream. And again, on behalf of the project team, thank you for joining us tonight.